Chapter 7. Hank Gets Angry. At 2 p.m., Maxine was at home washing shampoo out of her hair when the doorbell rang. Grabowski? She put on a bathrobe and hurried to the door. But it wasn't Grabowski. It was another police officer who had come to pick up Maxine's research papers. "Don't lose anything," said Maxine. "I'll need those papers when I go back to my research at Marquette in 6 months. Tell that to Grabowski." That morning, Maxine had looked through these papers, looking for any unusual figures that might show that someone had added water to her tetrodotoxin solutions. She found nothing unusual. After the police officer left, Maxine drove downtown to Marquette University. She needed to talk to someone about what was happening. She thought of Virginia Goust. Virginia shared a lab with Maxine. If the poison that killed Nanette came from Maxine's lab refrigerator, Virginia might have an idea how that had happened. Maxine parked her car under the same trees by the biochemistry building where she had parked it the night before. Inside was a strong smell of research chemicals used by students and professors. She knocked on Virginia's office door. Virginia was sitting at her desk, staring at her computer. Papers covered her desk. "Maxine," she called out with her usual good cheer. She quickly put her papers into her drawer. "I was just talking about you with a handsome police detective named Grabowski. He says that Nanette died from poison. He also said you asked for tests to be done for that poison. How did you know?" "Stanley suggested it." Maxine took some exam papers off a chair and sat down. "What else did Grabowski ask you?" "He asked how long I'd known you, what kind of researcher you were, how careful you were with your chemicals. What's going on, Maxine?" Maxine decided to tell Virginia everything, except about Hank spending the night at her house after Nanette's burial. But before she could start explaining, she was interrupted by Charlie. He came in and sat down. Virginia frowned at him. "Don't you have work to do?" she asked Charlie. "It can wait," answered Charlie. "Are you talking about Nanette's murder?" he asked Maxine. "Does Grabowski have his eye on anyone besides us? Last night I thought he was going to put us both in jail." Virginia was listening closely. "What did Grabowski tell you?" she asked. "He said he hasn't found any other place in Milwaukee where there is tetrodotoxin. Only this lab," Maxine replied. "Maxine!" Virginia cried. "If Grabowski thinks the tetrodotoxin came from here, doesn't that put you in a bad position?" "It puts me in big trouble, as Grabowski said. For that reason, I want to find out where Nanette got the poison, in case Grabowski decides I poisoned her." Virginia frowned. "That poison acts quickly," Maxine said. "Grabowski needs to find out who Nanette was with just before she came to Mercy Hospital." "How did she get to Mercy Hospital?" asked Charlie. "Taxi," answered Maxine. Charlie smiled. "There's your answer. Find the taxi driver and ask where he picked her up." Virginia turned to Charlie. "You waste a lot of time sitting around doing nothing. No wonder you don't have your PhD yet." "I don't have my PhD because you won't approve my reports," said Charlie angrily. Maxine ignored the usual argument between Charlie and Virginia. They had never liked each other. "I'll ask Grabowski if he's found the taxi driver," Maxine said. She wrote a note for herself. She would ask Grabowski when she saw him again. She got up to leave. Virginia held up a hand. "Do you want to play tennis at the club after work tomorrow night, Maxine?" she asked. "I'll be up until midnight too, working here. The tennis courts are always free after midnight." Maxine agreed. She used to play with Virginia once a week at midnight at the tennis club. It stayed open all night. Charlie followed Maxine to the entrance door of the building. "Charlie," said Maxine, "what's wrong with Virginia?" You two never got along, but she's getting even ruder. If you would put on a clean shirt and shave, she might be nicer. Charlie looked around to make sure no one heard him.
Virginia's been in a terrible mood lately. I think she's having trouble with her research.
Impossible, exclaimed Maxine. Virginia's famous for her research. Research is her life. All she does is work. Charlie shook his head.
This year, the Research Review Committee at Marquette will review her research. They'll decide whether she will keep her lab and office, her salary, everything. Even if the drug company keeps giving her money, she might not have a place to do her research.
Virginia will have no problem getting her research approved, laughed Maxine. Charlie lowered his voice.
She stopped doing any lab work months ago. She told me that she doesn't need the lab computer anymore. But she sits in her office for hours working on her reports, as if she is having trouble.
Maybe she's writing something for a medical magazine, suggested Maxine. Charlie lowered his voice.
I think her research money has been cut, Maxine. 6 months ago, she said she would buy a new refrigerator for the lab using her research money, but we still have no new refrigerator.
You and Virginia don't like each other, but that's no reason to doubt her research, frowned Maxine.
This has nothing to do with me. Virginia has been seeing Hank. Lunches, dinners, for months. Hank is the head of the Research Review Committee.
So?
I think Virginia is trying to persuade him to approve her research, Charlie said. I think she knows it might not get approved.
How do you know? Have you read her reports? Demanded Maxine. But Charlie saw Virginia coming down the hall. He hurried away. Back at Mercy Hospital, Maxine went to the payphone in the hall to call Grabowski. She wanted to ask Grabowski where the taxi had picked up Nanette. She wanted to ask if he knew why Nanette had been wearing a black leather miniskirt the night she died. She also wanted to ask if Grabowski had found another place to get tetrodotoxin in Milwaukee. Maxine called Grabowski's office. He was out, so she left a message with the secretary. Maxine was worried. Why did Grabowski get so upset when he thought she was having an affair with Hank? Did Grabowski think that Hank had murdered Nanette? Worse, did Grabowski believe that Maxine had killed Nanette? At 8 p.m., Maxine went to the hospital cafeteria for dinner. At a small table in a quiet corner, she read her list of questions. She was thinking about what else she should ask Grabowski when a hand dropped on her shoulder. Hank sat down next to her. His lips were tight, and his face was white. Detective Grabowski came into my office today with a crazy story. He said Nanette was poisoned. He said it might be murder. Hank's blue eyes were like stones. He said you gave him that idea. Hank, I should have called you. I wanted to wait until I knew more. Nanette is dead and buried. Can't you leave her alone? Hank asked. A healthy young woman with no history of a heart problem drops dead of a heart attack. It isn't right. Why do you care, Maxine? I'm trying to find out the truth. Hank, why does this bother you? It bothers me because I don't want this dark shadow hanging over her, Hank said. Nanette and I had our troubles, but I loved her. I'm sorry, Hank. He put his face in his hands for a moment. It's out of our hands now. He pushed back his chair.